Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Atlantic CIL podcast. I'm here with my friend Amanda, and she is a great disability advocate that I know. And we're going to talk about things like advocacy and her journey in disability work. So, hi, Amanda.
Hi, Donald. How are you?
I'm good. So, Amanda, I always like to start at the beginning. How did you get involved in disability advocacy and disability work?
Well, I want to say first off, disability advocacy has always been a passion of mine. I was born with a developmental disability called cerebral palsy. So I grew up in a family that always taught me to speak up for myself and to know the rights that I have and things like that. So it was always in my nature to want to be involved in advocacy. But I really got involved when I got involved in a course through Rutgers University through the Bog Center called Partners in Policy Making. I'm a graduate of the 2021 class, but in that class I was asking about how to get more involved in advocacy, and that led me to my career today at Motion Center for Independent Living, which is another CIL that covers Monmouth and Ocean County. I've been there for 5 years now, so learning a lot about advocacy and helping others. And the biggest part of it all is it's not just about you; it's about helping other people.
Yeah, that's a great point. So tell us about how did you even find the Boggs Center and join the partners in policy making, and tell us about about the program, what it's like.
Great question, Donald. I found out about the Bog Center through a worker at Latison Network that had just sent me a flyer about it. She said, I think you would be really good for this program. Now, another good question. Partners in Policymaking is an advocacy course, 8-month advocacy course that usually runs from September till April, and you learn from experts in the field. You learn from Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. You learn from people in Medicaid. You learn from other self-advocates. So it's a great course to get more involved in advocacy and know what advocacy is really about. It kind of led me on my journey to what I'm doing today. So for anyone that's interested in that course, I would really highly recommend the Bog Center Partners in Policymaking because it really just starts you on your journey of learning about advocacy and what it's all about.
That's awesome. And do you apply? Can anyone take it? How's it work?
You can apply for it. I think they actually have applications open right now for partners for the year of 2027. So 2026 to 2027. I believe they have applications open right now. You could apply through the Bog Center website online. That's through Rutgers University. I don't know the exact website of like how to get there, but I know that's where you can enroll for that. When I joined it, it was on a virtual platform totally because we were in the pandemic at the time. But now I believe that they're back to offering it hybrid, which is like, I guess sometimes they go in person and sometimes they're online. But like I said, it's a great course to get you started in the advocacy field if it's something that you're looking into for sure.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. And tell us how you got connected to Motion Center, the great center that serves Ocean and Monmouth County. You said after partners in policy making, you ended up there. How did that happen?
Well, I was actually talking with one of my classmates in Partners in Policy Making on a virtual meeting, and I said she would happen to be really involved in advocacy. And I said, do you know a way that I could get more involved in advocacy and kind of keep this learning going and get my voice out there? And she had said, have you heard about your local Center for Independent Living? And at first, I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know what a Center for Independent Living was.
I didn't know either until I became
Um,
a director.
So we have that in common. So yeah, I have noticed as I cross paths with a lot of people with developmental disabilities, they don't know what Centers for Independent Living, they don't even know what they do. And I was one of those people. I had no idea in all my years of living with a developmental disability what a Center for Independent Living was. So she said they really help with people with disabilities. It's a great place to get your voice out there and your advocacy started. And I really didn't think at the time that I was going to be hired in a position for that company, but I just started going on as a volunteer, like going on their virtual meetings, becoming a member of their CIL, kind of trying to know what it's all about. And I was literally only there for maybe not even a month. And I got into a meeting with my supervisor at the time and the executive director. of motions, and little did I know that they were hiring me behind the scenes. So now 5 years later, I could say there's so much I know how to do that I didn't know how to do before. So it's really been
Yes, so
quite a
that's a
journey.
great story because people ask me how to get involved all the time. And that's a great story because you're right. Volunteering is a great way to get your foot in the door and get to know people, and you never know where that can lead. Like, I was originally on the board of my center, and then an opportunity opened up, and I was able to get the job as director. So, especially if you're looking to get involved, it's a great place to start. What type of stuff do you do at the center, or and have you done?
My title for them is their outreach coordinator, so I have programs going on. I do outreach for them. If we need sponsorships, I do outreach for that. I also have recently, for about a year now, it started last October, started a group called Horizon, which is a women's self-advocacy group. And I've had speakers from Span NJ on there, 180 Turning Lives Around, and had the group started in October. Attendance is not always great, but we're getting there. This month I have a life coach coming on talking about mind, body, and spirit. She's from the Grace Academy Center. I don't know exactly where she's located, but she's coming on next Wednesday, April 15th at 3 o'clock. I have put a link on my social media to get some women involved in that, but definitely I would love for more people to come on and support the group for
Yeah,
sure.
send me the links too, and we'll put it on our in the
Awesome,
podcast
awesome.
bio.
I have known I have sent it to some of your colleagues at the Atlantic CIL too for them to promote it out there. So
Yeah, and it's always when you're starting, especially a new group, it does take a while for attendance to kind of get steady. So keep at it. What stuff did you learn by working for motions that you didn't know before about disability advocacy? You say you learned a lot.
one thing I learned early on is that advocacy is not just about you. I think I said it in my opening statement on the podcast. It's about helping other people. I mean, when I first got involved in advocacy, I would think, oh, I'm just going to share my lived experience of living with CP and be done with it. No, there's a lot more involved in it. And there's a famous quote that goes around that I'm sure you know, Donald. We say it all the time, nothing about us without us. And it's so true. That's from rules being made in Medicaid to anything down to DDD to meeting with our legislators and people that are in charge of all these laws going on and things like that. So I learned early on how to talk with legislators, not only how to talk with legislators, but how to plan meetings with them because I was doing the outreach to the legislator offices to try to get these meetings set up. And these meetings would consist of anything from if there was changes going on in Medicaid that we had to let the legislators know about, or there's a lot going on in the government now that could affect people with disabilities. So we're being really involved in all of that. And it really taught me early on that it's not just about me. I've also learned how to help people apply for services. Division of Developmental Disabilities. I've learned how to help consumers apply for services in the state. I walked them through how to fill out applications. I walked people through how to fill out Medicaid applications. So there's a lot of learning that I've done that I didn't know how to do in the past.
Yeah, that's a great point about knowing that, yes, it is about your story, but it's about using your story to advance the greater cause and to help people and break down some systemic barriers. What tips would you give people with disabilities for meeting with legislators? Because I know a lot of people with disabilities can be nervous about that. So what tips would you give, if any?
I would say don't be intimidated. They're there to listen to you.
Right.
They actually want to hear from you. They want to know what is hindering your life. I actually just I was on a meeting with Congresswoman Murphy through the ARC talking about, like the barriers of transportation, stuff that's happening with Medicaid. So I was on a panel for that. I also just recently got invited to a panel with Senator Van Drew. So I'll be doing that shortly too. But just getting out there and being involved and don't be nervous. I mean, you're gonna be nervous at first, but always remember that they're there to listen to you. They want to know what's going on, what's happening. They want to know your lived experience and what's happening with your life to try to hopefully better improve it. I mean that's their job.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I agree. And I would also say, have a clear point when you're meeting with them. I think that sometimes when we do advocacy, like I said, tell your story, yes, but always think about what barrier do you want them to address? What bill do you want them to support? Because sometimes I sit in meetings and people tell great stories, but you don't see them ask what they want the decision maker to do. And like that's really important. And so have a strategy and really think through what you're doing. And don't assume that they, like you said, they don't necessarily know a lot about Medicaid or different disability issues. They should, but a lot of times you'll be surprised that they don't. What would you, like I said, what would you say to somebody who is like intimidated and is afraid to get involved in advocacy? Maybe is not a good speaker or doesn't feel like they can contribute in any way. So what would be your advice?
I would say there's a lot of parts to advocacy. Like if you don't feel comfortable getting up in front of a Zoom meeting and talking to a legislator or getting up in front of people and talking, you could maybe, I don't know, write them letters or
Right.
there's all different avenues you could take if you're not comfortable with the public speaking part of it. And also maybe learn from somebody that's a little bit more established, that knows how to talk to legislators or has experience. Get involved with somebody like a Donald or Amanda that has a little bit of experience
Right.
under their belt, that knows how to talk to legislators and kind of learn from them. Even if you just sit on a meeting and job shadow them or shadow them and know how they're speaking and ask questions. And I can't stress it enough. Ask as many questions as you can because that's how you learn.
Right.
So,
And also, it's okay to go to meetings like there's so many meetings, there's different committees, there's the State Independent Living Council, there's a lot of public meetings where you can just sit, ask questions, and learn. And you may not know. I know when I first started going to a lot of these meetings, I'm sure you can relate to, Amanda. I didn't know what was going on. Like, I didn't know everything. I knew some things. I was like, what are they talking about here? But every meeting you learn a little something more and you continue to grow. I always say, like, don't think you don't belong in these rooms. They need to hear from you. There's nothing wrong with asking questions and there's nothing wrong with just going to a meeting and listening too. Like, you're allowed
yeah,
to just listen.
of course, I'm whatever webinars out there or if there's things going on, I grab a hold of whatever I could grab a hold of. Because once you have the knowledge, I always say nobody could take it away from you. And you might feel awkward going into that room at first, but like I said, you don't know the connections that you're gonna build by doing something, and
Right. And like I said,
until you actually do it. So, because I'm all about connections for sure, you know.
right, I agree. It's really important to network. And like I said, you may go to the first meeting and not know who anyone is or really what they're talking about. And then you learn each time. So just, don't feel like you have to know everything right away because I don't know. I've been doing this 9 years and doing disability stuff my whole life. But you learn as
You
you
should
go.
you should never stop learning. The day you stop learning, that's a problem.
Yes,
You always have to keep on learning and growing and know how to better yourself and like I said, just keep making those connections because those connections are so important. I'll go back to my story with Congressman Woman Murphy when I was talking about the issues I was having with public transportation and the barriers I was facing with New Jersey Transit Access Link, and she was saying, I'm on this committee for transportation. If I ever really need your voice, I'm gonna think of you." So just being on that meeting with her and letting her get to know me, she was like, "Wow, Amanda might be a good person to like bring to the table with this." So I'm just sharing that story because you never know what connection you might make in a meeting or an in-person meeting or whatever you're doing.
right. That's a great point. And so you brought up transportation. What's it like here in New Jersey? What were you talking to Congresswoman Murphy about?
Well, I could speak for public transportation. I know with me, Access Link doesn't come to my home. So I live outside of their three-quarters of a mile radius of the bus route. So unless I get dropped off to a local Wawa where they could pick me up, I'm kind of I'm in a pickle, so I'm currently working, hopefully working with some Congress people on that to try to better my situation. But
Right.
nothing like that happens overnight. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely a work in progress. But I would say transportation overall, not just in New Jersey alone, but all over the country. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, Donald, is a great big barrier for people with developmental disabilities.
It is for people with all disabilities, and I think that it's always been an issue, especially for us in South Jersey, where we are a more rural area. So it is very difficult. And for those of you that are listening that don't know, Access Link is the paratransit here in New Jersey run by NJ Transit. So, and they only, you have to be, what is it, 3 miles from a bus stop?
I think it's three-quarters of a mile from a local bus stop area, like a New Jersey Transit route area. So, and they only cover the bus route line. So if you're outside of that line, they're not going to come get you where you directly need to be. It's a great service that's out there, but like anything else, there needs to be improvements. And I'm hoping to be one of those voices that gets better services for people with disabilities down the road.
Yeah, that's great. What other barriers do you see for people with disabilities?
I often see times where people may not get approved for DDD because something might hinder with their disability and they might not think that they're appropriate for that service. I often see people that have aides come in the home. Now, my mom is my aide, but I have friends that have personal assistants that come into their where they live, and maybe those workers are not getting paid enough, and there's a big turnover for
Right.
people with that need assistance with everyday care. So that was one of the other issues that I was talking to the legislator about is higher wages for DSPs and how important that really is.
Right, right, right. And DSP is direct support professional for anybody who doesn't know. And that is key. There is a lot of turnover in that field, and the wages are relatively low, can be, especially when you consider the work. And of course, when it's low, it makes it hard to get consistent workers for people. So yeah, that's very, very important. What about employment? I mean, you were able to successfully get a job, but do you see any barriers with employment?
Yeah, I actually had a friend who just told me that she tried to apply for, I think, a journalism position, and they were asking her questions, and they really, I guess, were hindering against her disability, and she didn't get applied for that position. I've been very fortunate in my career outside of the 5 years at the center that I was at. I was a branch greeter for what was called at the time Investors Bank. They're now called Citizens Bank. But I was there for 12 years and I got that job through a day program that I was at. So I've been very fortunate in the employment aspect of everything, but I will tell you that there's a lot of people with disabilities that don't have such an easy road with all of that.
Right. And I think also what people don't understand is your benefits, if you get any type of support, are tied to people's incomes. So people are prevented from working as much as they can because of their disabilities or or fearful of working at all because of their disability.
That's
So
that's a great point that you put up. I was working 20 hours for the position I was in at the time, and I guess I was going over the SGA limit that they had at Social Security only by $100, and I got kicked off of benefits. So
right.
I had to literally fight for a whole year to get back on benefits. So that's a good point that you bring up, Donald. Is a lot of people with disabilities, they want to work, but there's sometimes that fearful aspect of it where they're afraid to work because they're afraid they're going to lose much needed benefits that they really need to live their everyday life.
Right, or
So
get and SGA is substantial gainful employment for anybody who doesn't know, and that is what you get if you make over a certain amount. And I know that for me, when I got my job at the center, I was over that amount, and I told Social Security and everything, but I still got hit with what's called an overpayment, which is what you get if you were receiving benefits while you were over that amount for too long, and I had to pay that back. So it becomes a very difficult, it's hard to navigate. It's not as easy as people think. I had even told Social Security I was working, But by the time they got into their system that I was working, I was still receiving some benefits, and I had to just straighten that out. But I got it all figured out and I got it all fixed, but it's a very complicated process that a lot of people don't understand. So it's easy to get caught up in. So what would you say to somebody who was looking for employment with a disability? What would be your kind of your tips?
I would say I mean, the benefits are really important, and you don't want to lose like Medicaid if that's a big thing that supports a lot of programs that we have. And but if you have a chance to be employed and get a decent pay and have a good career, don't let the government let you be afraid of advancing yourself. It is a catch-22 sometimes because you feel like you really need those services and you do. But I always say don't let the fear of losing something keep you from wanting to advance yourself. I haven't been offered a very good position yet, but if I ever do down the road, it would be something I would have to consider along with my family and myself. I would have to outweigh my options and say, is this decision really worth it? And what do I do about this? So, like you said, there's a lot involved in it, but I would not let yourself be stopped by the government or something like that to make a good choice for your life, you know?
Yeah, I would just say, like you said, weigh the trade-off. Is
Yeah,
it worth how much are you making? What benefits are you getting? How far do you have to go? Is it a work from home type of situation? Is it flexible? Like, think about what works for you. And there are programs that the government offers where you can keep your benefits and work. You just have to keep your eye on what you're working. In New Jersey, there's called NJ Workability, which lets you keep your Medicaid. There are also Able accounts, which we've talked about on the podcast before. So there are avenues to pursue, but you really have to think about it. Give yourself time to think about it and see what you want to do. I think that's really the message of centers too, which is like this is your life and you have to choose your own path. Did you transition from what was your transition like after high school? I know that is a sometimes a big struggle for
that's
people
a
with
good question too,
disabilities.
and
So
thank
yeah.
you for bringing that up to my attention. But I recently did a pure education series with the Bog Center about and we were covering transition. And what I brought up is that from high school when I graduated at 17 to about 5 years later, I was kind of lost in transition. And what I say about that is I didn't really know what direction I wanted to go in. I tried college, it wasn't really for me. I tried DVRS, but they really couldn't provide me the services I needed at the time, which was, personal assistance services and transportation. They really couldn't offer to help me with that. So that kind of led to a dead road. So I kind of sat around for 5 years just really doing nothing and not using my potential. And 5 years later, my mom got in touch with a really good representative from Medicaid, and she told us about Lattice Network, which was the day program that I got involved with. But one thing led to another. I started meeting other people with developmental disabilities there, and that led me to my career that I spoke about earlier at Investors Bank as a greeter. So it was a tough road at first, and you often see that with people with disabilities. They get lost in transition because a lot of the families don't know where to go after they leave the school system and what avenues to take. I often get phone calls at Motions talking about from parents talking about, okay, what do I do with my child now? So they're calling centers and trying to find out what needs to be done. So it's sad to say, but you often see that happen a lot where people with developmental disabilities get lost in transition.
Yeah, and why do you think that is? I mean, let's talk about that a little more. Why do you think people get lost in transition from your experience?
Well, I'll speak from my personal experience. At the age of 16, 17, I really didn't know what services were out there for me and my family, and neither did my parents. So, you're relying on the school system to tell you things that are out there, and that's not, oh, they don't always know what's out there for people with disabilities. So, I always say, and I said it in the peer education series with the Bog Center, if your child is in high school and start planning for transition at 14 years old, at least at 14 years old, to try to get these services planned out and know what's happening. Because that happens with with people regardless whether they have a disability or not. If you don't know what track you want to take, you're kind of gonna get lost in the shuffle. But when you put a developmental disability on top of it, it makes it twice as hard.
Right. I agree. I think you're right. Get started as soon as possible because I know with our experience, the longer people wait, the more challenging it is to get some services. So think things through and ask questions. Like I know in Amanda and I's perfect world that the school system would, tell you everything you need to know and it would be perfect. But Amanda and I both know that that's just not the real world. A lot of times your school could have limited resources. They might not know. A lot of times schools are so busy and overwhelmed with everything they got to get done throughout
And
the
a
day.
lot of
There's
times I
no
feel
time.
like the school system, in my case especially, I graduated the Lacey Township High School District school system, but I feel like sometimes they just want to push you out the door. Like they want to get you
Right,
graduated. You know
right,
what I
right,
mean?
right.
So like they're gonna give you whatever services that they could think of, but they're not gonna follow through with any. It's up to you to know, okay, what is my plan for after when I didn't know, especially I could have graduated with my class at 17, but I didn't know till later down the road that the school system should have still been responsible for me till I was 21.
Right, you can stay if you have a
Yes,
disability.
yes. And I didn't know that.
Right, it's important for people to know that and to look it up. I mean, and that's your choice too. I was offered that, but I wanted to graduate my class with everybody at 17, 18, so that's what I did. But, some people need a little extra time, and a lot of times schools don't advertise that. Either they don't know, or it does cost them more money
I
too.
was
So,
gonna say a lot of the times they don't advertise it because they don't want to be putting out the funding.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Well, I would
it's
I was trying to be nice,
yeah.
but it is a thing that you do have a right to ask for in New Jersey, and it's important to ask about it. And again, as like Amanda said, sometimes it's just that the school is focused on getting you graduated, and that's their goal. And what happens after that, they really look as your responsibility. So, and again, you can say that's not fair and that's not right, and you'd be right, but like you do also have to take control of your own life too. There are great resources on the internet. There are great resources at your local center where you can talk about DVR, Division of Recreational Rehab, which helps people with disabilities find jobs, and DDD, which helps people with developmental disabilities get all kinds of community services. And if you don't fit into any of those boxes, there's other organizations too. But I always say, don't wait for somebody to figure it out for you. And I'm sure you agree with that, Amanda. Nobody's going to knock on your door and be like, oh, I heard you transitioned. Like, this is
Yeah,
not
they're
going
not gonna knock on your door and tell you what services are out there. You
right.
kind of have to you have to know for yourself what questions to ask and what to do.
And kind of figuring it out. And that's why advocacy is so important. Do you have any good, and it doesn't have to be long, but do you have any good advocacy stories where you were like, wow, this is where I was really able to advocate for myself and turned into a positive outcome? Do you have anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I can think of one thing, and this dates back even before I started my career. Back in high school, when I was about 14 or 15 years old, I was in the school choir, and they were going on a trip to Disney World with the school. And my parents had, I have other siblings that not living with me, but at the time they were living at home. And my parents really couldn't take me on the trip and be my aide there. They had other obligations that they had to do. The school system kept pushing it off on my parents and I kept saying, "No, no, she's a part of this choir. She fundraised for this trip. She's entitled to this trip."
Right.
And it took a little bit, but the school system in their interviews with personal assistants for me, they were asking, "Would you want to go on this Disney World trip with her?" And luckily, and I was blessed enough that they found a nice lady that was willing to do it for me and be a part of that trip, but it took some time. And I would have to say that was my first real feeling of standing up and advocating for myself and saying, "No, I'm not going to just let you say no, I can't go on this trip.
Right,
But
right,
you're
right.
you're you're gonna find a way for me to get on this trip because I'm entitled to be there just like everybody else."
Right, that's a
So
great story too, because like you said, if you didn't say anything, they would have been they would have been like, okay, like, and moved on. And that's a great story. And who doesn't want to go to Disney World? So I'm sure that aide was like, I'll go.
Yeah, I know. Who doesn't want to go to Disney World, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
and it,
But
and
that,
it and it turned out to be a really good experience. And I got to be with my other peers and be on the trip. But that was my first experience of really standing up for myself and fighting for myself.
right. And that's a great point too, because, somebody maybe without a disability could hear the story and go, what's the big deal about missing a trip? But like, that's it's a fun trip. It's a chance to be with your peers and it's like for you, like you say, you were a part of this choir, and if you're saying I can't go, then I'm really not. You're saying in a way that I'm not part of the choir, right? Because I can't
Yeah.
participate in what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, so and that's a part of discrimination as well. Like if the school system's telling you no, you fundraised your part of the trip and got what you needed, and they're telling you no because you don't have PA services. That's really wrong. And that's what I was really even at 15 a fire lit under me and I said, this is not right, but little did I know that late a year down the after I graduated, there was a girl that wanted to go on the Florida trip and she was in the same boat that I was. She had CP, and I kind of led the way for her. Like that family spoke up and said, "Well, I remember Amanda speaking up about this, and why can't this happen?" So I led the way for somebody else, which was
That's a great point too. And was she able to go too? Did
yeah,
she
she
end up?
was yes, yes. So
See, and that's why it's important because some people may hear this story and go, "Okay, what does that matter?" But you broke down a barrier that
yeah,
that
yeah,
now is the pre now nobody can come in and say we've never had to do this before. Now it's like, well, no, you did have to do this before.
you did have to do yeah, yeah,
And you did it, and life moved on. And guess what? The world didn't collapse because you had to find a new way.
yeah.
So that's why it's important, and that's where I'll give you a closing word on anybody who's like maybe if you could tell some 15-year-old person like yourself who's just starting to figure out the world and maybe has any type of disability and realizing that sometimes it's the world starting to feel a little unfair and really tell them what you would tell that person knowing what you know now.
I would tell him, I would say, if I would tell that 15-year-old self of mine, don't give up. That experience in itself taught me like, wow, this turned out to be even if it turned out to be negative and I didn't get to go. Don't let that fight inside of you stop. Or don't let somebody stop you from what you really want to do in life. And I grew up in a, like I said it in the beginning of the podcast, I grew up in a family that treated me like everybody else. And I have three able-bodied siblings that just because I had a disability, they made sure that I was treated just like them,
I know my
So
my siblings are paying too. I get it, man. I get it.
so
They're the
that
same
that that
way.
really started the foundation for me to be, treated like everybody else and be a part of society. And I really think my faith gets me through my disability because there are hard times. There are days where I feel like, oh, how am I going to get through today? But my faith and my believer in the good Lord above kind of gets me through my disability.
Well,
You
that's
know?
awesome. And what you said is so true about just not giving up. And I know it sounds corny sometimes because, depending on your circumstances, it can be really hard. And we're not saying that it's not really hard or really unfair. And I always say, my joke is always when people say to me, you've overcome a lot. I'd be like, yeah, that's great, but I like people with disabilities to stop having to overcome. Like we're overcoming. We just wanted to be. So just continue to break down those barriers. And when you're doing your life is advocacy, even if you have a disability, you're not interested in advocacy, you're going to unfortunately be doing advocacy
Yeah,
anyway. So
even if,
embrace.
like you said, even if you don't get in this career that we're in and we're doing this every day, when you have a disability, advocacy is going to become part of your life.
Yes.
Whether you like it or not, we're always gonna have to fight for something, and whether it's a bill being passed or services being better services for us or better ways of living our life, you're always gonna have to fight for something out there. And even if you can't use your voice, know that there's other ways that you could speak up for
Right. You
yourself.
you
And
just existing and showing up in any way is a form of
yeah,
advocacy.
yeah.
You
Yep.
just existing and showing up is a form of advocacy. So just keep pushing. And remember, there's a whole community out there because I think you and I can relate to this too. Like when I was younger, I didn't even consider I just was like me. I didn't really think of like the bigger disability community because we're not, that wasn't in our face. But now there's great groups on social media and there's your CIL and there's great videos to watch about the importance of the disability community. So you're not alone. We're 25% of the population. We actually outnumber them. And, I don't know about outnumber, but we're pretty close. And we win in the end because if they live long enough, they'll get a disability too. So, just understand that there's a lot of support out there. And like Amanda said, there's no reason to let your disability prevent you from living the life you want to live, however you define it. It's up how you ever define it, whatever works for you.
And I would say, one of my closing thoughts is if you really want to get to know disability and know the history of it, what really got me involved in advocacy is the documentary Crip Camp.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's a
I'm
great
sure
documentary.
you've heard of it, Donald. Judy Heumann, who was the mother of the disability rights movement, who passed away, I believe, 2 years ago, but I actually got to interview her through Motions, which was pretty cool. I would say start with that. Like, just know what our history is about, know what we've been through, what our population's been through. Even the Judy Heumann book, Being Human, I always say that that really led me to my career after realizing what she did for people like us and kind of being the main pioneer of the ADA and getting the ADA started and all that she really did. Kind of when I read that book, I really felt I saw myself in her story and I said I really have to continue her legacy and know that I could be a voice just like she was, you know.
Yeah, and those are great resources to start out with. The first thing I have a new hire do at my center is watch Script Camp.
Oh
So
wow.
because because it's the gives you a framework of you got to know our history, which as a person with a disability, and I know we keep saying it's our closing and then talking, but as a person with a disability, we're not taught our history a lot in school. So until I started learning it through books like Being Human, which is Judith Human's book, and Crip Camp, there's an amazing history that people have to understand. That's really important. And you can get Being Human. It's a great audiobook as well. So, just learn and realize you are a part of a larger struggle of disability rights and disability existence and disability justice. So just know that your community is out there. All right. Well, thank you, Amanda, for a great podcast. And please, we're going to link to a lot of Amanda's information in our bio. She's got great activities. She's at the Motion still. She's always doing awesome stuff. So just get involved. And thank you so much, Amanda, for being on our podcast.
Yes, thank you, Donald, for having me on. I really do appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.